This panel Q&A recording was hosted live over Zoom on Thursday, March 4th as a professional development seminar hosted by the Center for Nanothread Chemistry. We welcome our panelists for offering their time to answer questions from students and postdocs about forging a career in academia. We thus welcome Dr. Elizabeth Alakwa, an assistant professor from Penn State University. She is an experimentalist with research focus areas on organic, polymer, and supramolecular chemistry. Dr. Stephen Lopez from Northeastern University is a theorist and assistant professor of chemistry. His research focuses on organovoltaics and organoframeworks. Dr. Vin Crespi is a computational and theoretical physicist, chemist, and materials scientist at Penn State with broad interests in the chemistry of materials. He specializes in condensed matter physics and materials theory. Dr. Tom Maluk is a professor from the University of Pennsylvania and professor emeritus from Penn State University. He is an experimental chemist studying the synthesis and application of inorganic materials chemistry.
I think when you're a graduate student and a postdoc, perhaps maybe you're not sure what path you want to take. Worked for advisors who gave me a lot of freedom in lab. And so I always enjoyed the intellectual genesis behind a project. And in industry, at least to my knowledge, perhaps there's some positions that you're able to still do this. At some point, you lose the ability to kind of direct research, to think creatively. You're following a little bit more of a blueprint design. And I think it stifles that ability if that's something you really enjoy, which was something I did. So academia allows you to sustain that type of environment pretty much for your career, and you're dictating a lot of your research aspects or avenues and also sort of your students' direction. So I think that was for me one of the biggest reasons.
I agree with everything Beth just said, and the element of freedom in a sense, right? That to choose your direction and sort of it's entrepreneurial. When you start out as a faculty member, you sort of you don't always realize necessarily before you jump into it, but once you start doing it, you're just so many. Like when you're a postdoc, you focus on the science, and a faculty member, there's 100 things to keep track of. But I wanted to mention one other thing, which was that I also wanted to sort of have an influence on the governance of academic departments. That sort of things I experienced as a student and postdoc. I thought, I bet that could be done better. There's probably another way of approaching that. And then by becoming a faculty member, you're positioning yourself to hopefully have some influence there. So that was sort of another sort of parallel side to that for me.
But I'll just add, a lot of this sounds is in line with what I was motivated by too. But I think I had this kind of aha moment, I guess, during my postdoc, where I was working with kind of I was in a really kind of large group. It was one of these like 40 plus groups. And I had basically a group of 5 undergrads that I was working with. And I kind of, to some extent, felt like I was their PI almost, right? Because they, within the large size of the group, they kind of just went to me first as a kind of primary mentor. And I kind of thought, oh, like maybe I can actually, do this just with, graduate students in addition to undergrads too. So that was.
Oh, I agree. I maybe not quite as aha, but definitely that sense as well. When you're working with more junior people and you sort of feel, like you're getting a sense of what that can be like. Yeah, absolutely.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I think I like you, Steve. I had that role both as a grad student and as a postdoc, especially as a postdoc, because I was in a gigantic group where the boss really only had 5 minutes every year for each person, and so it kind of felt like a natural transition. But also, I guess I also felt like it was really worth a try. I had no idea if I would fail completely or not. Actually, about a year and a half in, I didn't know if I was ever going to publish a paper, but I figured it was okay. I could probably go get the other job I was going to get anyway if I've failed at being an academic. So.
Yeah, I mean, there's an element of just sort of uncertainty there, right? Because you don't know what's going to happen when you put in your proposals. Uh, I don't think it had personally affected me at sort of that decision point. I just sort of figure, oh, that's a thing that you'd have to do as a faculty member. I just sort of put it on the list.
Yeah, I think you'd be surprised, Brad. All my friends at National Labs, they're writing proposals much more frequently than I am because they have to raise their salary with some massive overhead on it. And in industry, you also are constantly reporting and defending what you're doing. So I think there's sort of no escape, and you have to you're going to have to do something like that wherever you go. Even if you start your own company, you're going to need a business plan and convince people to, you're like climbing a rope ladder that's on fire underneath you or something like that all the time. So you just have to get used to it.
I like that, the rope on fire. Or if you just like talk with, your PI, I'm sure that they would be really interested in being able to show you what the process is like, right? Just so you're not, so it's not, I guess, a surprise, once you get to the faculty position. And so I think it's a really good experience, and you could, try your hand at writing, right, and seeing what that process is like. I mean, I'm sure you'd see the reviews and that kind of stuff, and you could get a sense for what your PI does basically a lot of the time.
Okay, I would say to follow up a little bit on what Steven said, I also happened to work for a postdoc who let me work in something like a 90 to 95% capacity on a PRF grant pretty early. And he also was on sabbatical my second year and left me in charge of his renewal for an NSF. So there were some opportunities like that where you could just feel a little bit more integrated. And you have that same, like what Steve mentioned, the aha moment where you're trying to take the subgroup or the team of younger researchers and trying to put them together. But those are also confidence builders to some extent too, because you feel like you had that training. It wasn't how to write proposals 101 where your job was on the line or anything like this. It was a little bit high stakes but low anxiety for you as a postdoc to do that.
I actually had no experience whatsoever writing grants as a student or a postdoc. It was completely, but then somehow I didn't worry about it. I don't know. I just figured it's a thing you got to do.
I think though, having some sense of how to do it is good for getting the job in the first place, because
Yes.
you are going to have to write proposals to get the job, and they're going to have to be defensible to knowledgeable people who've read a lot of proposals before. It's a different kind of proposal. It's the faculty application proposal where you describe your ideas, not for a specific agency, but it is really important. That's probably what separates the people who get the job from the people who get an interview, or maybe even don't get an interview, is really the quality of their ideas and how they express them in the proposal.
Yeah, I'll say that now that I'm in my fourth year now at Northeastern, and I guess now that I've been on the other side, where I've been on search committees myself and hiring committees myself, when I read a proposal that like a postdoc is submitting now for an assistant professor job, what I'm thinking is how easily, like, one, how interesting are these ideas, right? Is there a lot of overlap with people already in the department? And then second, and probably equally as important, could this person adapt this proposal as is, fleshing out some of the parts of this more, and then create a proposal right away, right? How rough of a draft is this proposal from a submittable proposal? And that gives me an idea of how likely they are to start succeeding. So that gets me excited about a candidate, I think.
I mean, okay, we just talked about one of them, which is the research proposal. I think it varies a bit by field. So I'm the mostly physicist here, and partly chemist and partly material scientist. What I've seen, because I've seen the process in different departments, more some than others, but in chemistry, as Tom was saying and Steve was saying, the content of that research proposal is ranked right up at the top. In physics, I would say that the letters are probably, if you had to force a ranking, I don't think it really makes sense to force a ranking of these things. I would say the letters come first, and that comes below. People, that's not part that you put into your application, but it is something that shows up in your application. So just in terms of how the different elements interact, that's an important part of it. But you don't write it, so.
In chemistry, we have a lot of grade inflation on the letters. So
yeah,
we'll get 200 applications for a faculty position. 100 of them will express the tremendous gratitude the boss has for this person being such a terrific postdoc, and it'll be flowing with superlatives. And it's really hard actually to differentiate the top, at least top 30% on the basis of letters in chemistry.
Yeah, I guess another point about the letters is, at least in our departments and in departments that maybe, unlike ours, have heavy divisions, you might also get, 10 applicants from one academic lab. And then the letters maybe are too much weighed because you try to find and read between the lines to see who that person is, elevating a little bit more. Or there are certain professors who will give some numbers like, this candidate's in the top 1% of my applicants or my past postdocs, or top 5%. And you'll even see them start drawing some names to, comparison to names that are people who are either out there already that are well known or up and coming. And I think sometimes we read into those too much. So that's something where the letters, I think, in our department can get a little bit too much value, because the interview of 5 students from one lab or similar labs are going to be very similar.
There's an interesting effect where, when you're applying, of course, it feels, it's stressful and it feels very competitive. And so in the back of your head, at least I was thinking, boy, on the other side of this, when you're searching, you must just, it must be so easy, right? It's so hard on this way. It must be so easy looking from the other way. And then when you get to the other side, you realize everybody who's involved in a search is also really anxious about, oh, it's not going to work, and they're going to say no, and this and that. And it's, it's sort of pervasive in that process. It's not just, you're not alone in those sort of senses of things. And that's partly where this thing that Beth's talking about comes from, is that the people reading these applications trying to figure out, all these people look terrific. All these applicants look terrific. How do we tell them apart? And those little nuggets where somebody actually explicitly makes a comparison or a number or something, people will key into those things, because they need something to key into, and it can be hard.
2 other ways that you can help make this, I guess, decision easier, right, on the committee, is the other 2 components that immediately come to mind is, one, your cover letter, right, which says a lot about how much you thought about the department, the university, centers at that university. It shows, you already are seeing yourself in that capacity. You could imagine collaborating with such and such a person. This kind of group is, this center is where you could, really apply your expertise. Or it's okay to say, I've noticed basically there's a gap in my case, like computational chemistry in this center, and I could really contribute to that if I were to come there. And that's a place to really show your intent and your maturity of that specific school. And then a second place is, not everywhere requires this, but the diversity statement is also really important these days. I think it's increasingly clear that there is a huge, overrepresentation issue in chemistry and STEM more generally. So, having a really thoughtful diversity statement that, describes, how you would, enhance the diversity on campus, the types of maybe outreach programs that you would encourage your graduate students to take on, how you might work with undergrads and local community colleges and high school K through 12 institutions would also help to make, a splash and to distinguish your application, right? So you want to make this as easy as possible for the committee to say, oh, wow, like this application is really well thought out. This is really different. And yeah, I guess that's just what I want to say about these other components.
Yeah, when you get into the place, with the grade inflation that Tom's talking about, then people looking at applications will look for some differentiator. So it could be that thing in the cover letter that, oh, this person's looks like they'd really thrive here. They fit in so well and they've thought it through. Or this person brings something, some new side to what they're doing in their diversity statement or their teaching statement that some of the decisions can end up being made in part on the basis of just how you fit into that department, what areas they're looking for. So the best you can do to sort of align yourself and pitch yourself towards your assessment of what they're looking for, the more likely you can, bubble through that filter or whatever the analogy is.
None of us mentioned the teaching statement. So I think that's not something that should be disregarded or just put together at the last minute. There are certainly a lot of universities that might be looking, into what classes you think would be exciting to teach. I know when we're evaluating candidates, one of the questions we ask are, what's their teaching potential? What courses might they be good at? And on some level, that's like the courses you identify might help put yourself in a box to some extent in terms of what your interests are and what you think would be your best to teach, both at the grad and undergrad level. And then another thing Stephen kind of mentioned, and I think Tom also did with the cover letter, list collaborations, like list people who you think you could identify with in a department. And just a pro tip, don't do it in alphabetical order, right? Because that kind of just implies looking through a website and putting people down. I think that's helpful because what it also does is if you do get the on-site interview and things like that, it helps the department identify who you should meet with, but also where you see your research developing. So there are some things like that that really help them identify basically what areas of chemistry you expect your research to dive into. So just wanted to mention those two things too.
Yeah, one piece of advice I got was if you go to an interview, is you want everybody you talk to come away thinking you're going to collaborate with them, or you could collaborate with them. And because, everyone has that certain level of interest, or just that you'd be a good colleague, or even if you didn't have a specific collaboration. On the teaching side, so for the schools which have a strong teaching focus to them, sort of the teaching research balance is of that weight, then your application, one thing we've seen, the MERSEC, we've moved over to more of a staff model, but for a while we had a model where we'd have a postdoc who was focused around outreach activities with a research component. And their background would end up being, they kept a research piece going, they did all this outreach stuff that was unique, and we would arrange for them to teach a class, to just take over a class, not a TA, but really teach a class, and often to get grant writing experience as well. We try to get all those pieces in, and for many of the institutions that are looking, that really helps an application stand out. It's, you see somebody who's taken a whole class on as opposed to being a TA in a class, and you have more confidence as a search committee that they're going to make that transition successfully.
If you're wondering when you should start working on them, the answer is now. No matter where you are in your career as a graduate student or postdoc, and the reason is this: in order to develop good ideas for proposals, it's really a learned skill. You really have to practice it. I think I was very fortunate. We were talking about the groups we were in when we were grad students and postdocs. Pretty much my graduate advisor and my postdoctoral advisor, while I admire them greatly, neither of them ever gave me a good idea to work on. And consequently, I had to work on my own ideas. And in fact, when I was a postdoc, I made a rule to never do anything my boss told me to do. And it worked out really well because that's how you get practice developing good research ideas. And I really encourage my own students to do this too, not to, of course, never do what I tell them to do, but to, after a certain point, develop their own ideas, because that gets so much easier after the first time you do it.
It's hard to do on a schedule. You can't say, I'm going to come up with my great research ideas in the next 2 weeks, because that's when they're due.
That's really true. And yeah, so you want to be hatching these ideas for a while, but it'll, at some point in the interview process, someone is going to ask you, very pointedly to defend these ideas, and you should be ready to go. I also just want to mention that the system has gotten tougher. So this was maybe 100 years ago when I got my first faculty job. But back then, not every place had one of these seminars where you had to present your research ideas. At every place that had one of those seminars style presentations, I didn't get an offer. I only got offers from the places where they didn't ask you to present your research ideas. But that doesn't exist anymore. So try to do a good job with that, and
a better job than Tom did.
Do a better job than I did. Take it seriously and practice where you are now, developing your own ideas.
The talk, right? The talk that Tom's talking about, the research talk. I've been surprised on the search committee to sometimes have candidates who seem like they've never got mentoring on what their talk should have in it. Maybe it's the big group effect where the advisor never actually listened to a practice talk. So make sure to get that feedback, get diverse feedback, from multiple sources, and practice it, because that's another learned skill. And I've been kind of aghast at some of what I imagine is the mentoring that's not happening where some people have originated from.
I mean, I've been on the search committee since pretty much the day I got here, which is a really fun scenario to be in. But I think like you remember the people who have already done the work for you to try to identify the connections they'll make to the department. And so by listing people, suggesting the MRSEC centers or the DOE centers or whatever other things that they feel like they can grow legs in if they were to be accepted, I think it's insanely helpful. And you start, for instance, you start arranging meetings with those people, you start talking to those folks more and trying to figure out how this person might fit in. Especially, I think in chemistry it's a little bit different, but there might be some people who are applying for instance, Chem N, Chem E. And in those particular scenarios, getting those departments on board early enough is also a good idea.
I think it's important there, and Beth alluded to this earlier, to not list those potential collaborators in alphabetical order. You can sniff it out when someone's doing lip service to that, that they're just, okay, I got to write down 3 things to fill this sentence out or something. So if you do that, if you're going to do that, put enough effort into it that it really is specific to that department. And sometimes when you look at the application, they have some higher degree of specificity in what they're looking for. Sometimes it's very broad. Sometimes there's more. If it's a good match in terms of topically, then put a lot of effort into that one, right? You can sort of gauge how much how much bang for the buck you'll get by putting that customization effort in.
Yeah, I would add that when you actually get called for an interview, that's when you want to start doing this in earnest. You really want to read up the place, and when you meet people, be somewhat familiar with what they do, et cetera. That's very helpful. it may be, less, well, in a given year, there may be 30 jobs out there or something like that. And it's hard to personalize each one that way. But maybe, as Vin said, the ones where it's a good match, then you want to put that in the cover letter.
And I don't remember how far ahead I was preparing them. Months, I mean, there's sort of a month's time scale to that, but not, I wasn't preparing 6 months ahead, but I didn't put it off till the last minute either, somewhere in the middle.
I mean, the whole thing is very seasonal, right? It has to be ready to go in October or whenever the deadline is. So yeah, I was very last minute also, and don't do that. Think ahead.
And it absorbs a lot of time and energy, when the whole applying process, in that year you're going through, and it's always sort of in your head and you're thinking about those research ideas and stuff. So it kind of almost doesn't have a start date in that sense.
Yeah, I want to say I started really doing this, or maybe the spring, like kind of April-ish, before I applied that fall. And I think one thing that was helpful for me, I don't know if this is going to work for everybody, but was that I talked to my PI while I was a postdoc about this, and just the idea of going to apply, right? Because sometimes the PI doesn't even know, they're very familiar with grad students and when they're supposed to graduate, right? And are they ready and that kind of. For a postdoc, I mean, you might be ready after a year, you might need 2, 3, right? I mean, maybe you try twice, right? That kind of thing. So for me, I think just having that conversation with my PI, and really getting that confidence, that like nod of approval from him kind of went a long way with like, okay, so this person thinks I can do it, awesome, and here are my ideas, right? And I think with him, he kind of showed me the things that would kind of overlap maybe too much with him, not as a competitor, just to improve my application. Because if you propose this, they might say, oh, this is too close with what I'm doing. And now that I have postdocs that are going on the job market, I've done the same thing with them, and it's been really cool to do that from both sides.
So I guess I could follow up on what Tom and Steve had said. In terms of preparing applications, I think I was similar to Steven. We started discussing it a little bit earlier, like in the spring before the fall. And I think by the time ideas started to merge in my head, things started becoming less bullet points and more paragraphs, probably around June or July, which I think was probably a little bit too late. The first application deadlines are often in September, and you maybe want to have some people read your proposals or even give a practice talk and see if there are things you're missing or things that should be in writing that aren't.
Aspect of preparation is figuring out who's going to write your third letter, right? So your graduate advisor and your postdoctoral advisor are each going to write a really great letter for you. That third person should be somebody who knows you really well and knows about your what you've done in your research. So if you've collaborated closely with another faculty member, that's really good. If you've been part of a center, where there's a lot of collaboration, that's really good. But you want to think about that effect, because if you don't have a good connection to the third letter writer, or third and or fourth letter writer, that can actually hurt you in your applications.
And then with what Tom said, I think that third or fourth letter writer, to a lot of people who may not think about it so carefully, you might just say, well, my undergrad advisor, I talk to him or her all the time, but that's probably not at all the best choice. It's got to be somebody who knows you a little bit better more recently. And it's one of those scenarios where even if that person really knows you for a year and a half or 2 years, it might be better than somebody that you've known for 5 or 6 years, but in a lessened capacity. For mine, I applied to programs that were, at the time, like Penn State had an organic focused call, and then others had a broader call, and I chose a letter writer as my third letter writer that was more on the organic side, that could comment on that particular aspect for Penn State versus other schools that were broader, and I thought somebody that maybe I had more collaborations with could give insights better.
Yeah, it's all, I agree with all that. Choosing the letter writer, someone who can speak to your state of preparation for the position you're applying for, that's familiar with your more recent work, and hopefully has been a collaborator or a colleague recently.
Right. You want to get a letter from someone, people who have name recognition if possible, all their factors being equal.
That's another thing that's like, it's not fair as far as who's connected to the networks where that information might be easier to ask about. I think as far as sort of research and teaching balance, it's usually pretty clear from the institution. So there's not really inside, sort of scoop or anything. Whether a place is especially collaborative or not, it's just sort of something people get impressions about. And I visited Penn State and another institution back on a weekend, and one before the weekend and one after the weekend, and boy, was it a contrast. The people at the other place hated each other. It was they were bad mouthing each other to the candidates. I was walking around. It was like, okay, I think I'm pretty clear on these two places. This may be somewhat dependent on the search committee, composition and sort of things like that. But I would say, I've had colleagues in physics, answer this question sort of directly, that, it's what you do and the person you work with. I mean, there are people in some fields that are really good that could be at any university. It's true in many different ways. And so in that sense, no, you don't. It's the work. I mean, the publication record, of course, factors into normalizing that out to some extent, although that correlates, of course. Life isn't completely fair there either. So one of the advantages that comes from people originating at those high profile places is that the letter writers will be able to make comparisons to other people who have come from those places, who have gone on and done good things here or there, because it's sort of a self-consistent reinforcing loop to that extent. So then when the people read the letters, they're like, oh, this person is, compares to this person or something, and it's by somebody who obviously was there. So it may be harder for someone to make those statements for different origination points, but I don't think those things end up being determinative. I'll let other people speak to it though.
Well, then where did you get your PhD?
Me?
Yeah.
So long ago. Yeah, Berkeley. I know we could do a test Panelists.
Where did you do your postdoc?
Pretty much the same place.
Okay. Me too. So I just want to say it's an unfair world. And
he knew the answer before he asked, by the way.
Yes, I know. So if you look statistically at who gets these jobs, it's very much disproportionately people at the top schools with a lot of name recognition. That doesn't mean that other people don't get these jobs, and there are a lot of reasons for that, right? One is, if you are at a place like that where many people are applying for academic jobs, there's a lot of kind of your peers provide a lot of coaching, with how to write these proposals, and there's just a lot of experience with the whole process, and you're in a place where exciting things are happening all the time. and it's an unfair world. So, I, you know,
I mean, I'll a little bit of a flip side of that is I've seen the quality of the mentoring to prepare people for this transition anti-correlate with the prestige of the institution. So, you know, there's sometimes, you know, being ignored in your, you know, in your research group because your advisor is too busy and you're not important enough for them, you know, that can have some pretty negative effects as well. So there, you know, there's that side of it. There's some counterbalance to that.
yeah, but it's interesting. I mean, it's not just the top 5 places, but there are research groups that send a lot of people to academics, and there are also super duper top research groups that don't. And you know, there's something about the mentoring or the just the love of science in those groups that might be different, that better prepare people for the whole process. So when you're choosing your postdoc, I would definitely be mindful of what their track record is like for sending people to the kind of job you want. I went to postdoc in an area where I didn't know very much, where I guess I knew enough sort of to get started after a rocky start, but it was different. And so when it came time to do my own thing, I could find problems that used both skill sets that not many other people had thought about. And that was an effective formula for having original ideas at the get-go.
Yeah, doing a postdoc where you shift your topic can give you a definite advantage in that, because those are the times you really can you know, develop new expertise and then distinguish yourself. There'll be a lot of people who know A and a lot of people who know B, and almost no one who knows A and B.
Yeah, that's exactly what I did. I worked a lot with small molecules and synthesis as a graduate student, but then went to polymers as a postdoc. So you kind of pay a steep price to some extent in that it takes you maybe a year or so to learn the field. So unlike some folks, my postdoc's a little bit longer. It took me a while to understand and learn and then be able to kind of creatively attack issues or problems or come up with my own ideas for how to advance the research projects. So I think that was one, you know, kind of way that Vin just described, taking A and B and making A, B out of it. And I think in terms of
A reaction.
yeah, Vin, it's your first covalent reaction of the Zoom section. So that's pretty good.
About time.
Organic training, right? So I think our group is still coming up with our primary research focus, and Stevens might be as well. You know, when you're a 4th year, things are still evolving. You're still trying to see what darts stay and play long enough. And most of ours are, you know, I always introduce our ideas as strange, weird, organic, physical organic, and polymer ideas. And they take mindsets from things that I worked on as a postdoc and things as a graduate student and very much mesh them together.
And I think you get a story that way, right? If you can bring together different things, you sort of get a unique arc to articulate, and that helps distinguish yourself. I will say I didn't do this at all at some level, but I sort of always did my own thing as a student and a postdoc. And if I saw people doing X, it sort of encouraged me to do not X at some level, or, you know, X from left field instead of straight down the center. So maybe I was always doing it in some way.
Yeah, this resonates a lot with, I think, my trajectory as well. So you know, my PhD was all in, you know, computational organic chemistry, right? So we basically used computations to figure out reaction mechanisms, right? And they were all for thermal reactions. And then in my postdoc, I kind of switched gears enough, which is just to be totally immersed in machine learning and chemistry, which sounds similar, but it's actually rather different. And I guess from that experience, I think, as Beth mentioned, you know, it took a good year, right, to be somewhere where I was comfortable enough, even just kind of talking about the methods that exist and how I might apply one over another one. So you kind of feel like a first year graduate student again, except now you've already gone through a PhD. So you very quickly know what you don't know instead of that kind of, year or two that you got, or year and a half that you spend floundering, I guess, in the beginning of grad school as you're figuring things out. So this experience kind of made the transition to the faculty position a lot easier, because you're oftentimes answering, how am I different from my postdoc advisor? How am I different from grad school, my graduate advisor? And can I build a program that is, A plus B, my little covalent example again.
It shows how what you said about being different than my advisor, that's a key element of this as well, that plays on what you've just heard from everybody. That if you're combining elements from different fields, right, then you're automatically different than your advisors, right? Because this advisor only does A and this advisor only does B, and you've combined them into something new. And that question does come up in search committees, that if somebody's work looks very much in line, 100% in line with what their advisor does, and their advisor is very well defined, then there'll be this question, okay, can they come up with their own ideas? And the answer might be yes, but there might not be anything on paper that definitively shows that. And the search committee may not be willing to invest in inviting that candidate for an interview if they can't get enough of that reassurance from the application. And of course, your research plan can do that job. But it's easier if you're able to bring two different fields together that are clearly not what your advisors do as an output.
I think there's something really practical about this, what Vin was just saying, right? If you're proposing ideas that are very similar to your, let's say, postdoc and or graduate advisor, right? You've got to imagine like a review panel, like at the NSF or the NIH or whatever, is going to see that there are these two very similar proposals, except there's one person that's been doing it for, X years or decades longer than this brand new faculty member. So, who is more likely to succeed in their proposal? Probably the more senior person, and then they get the money. So you can, that competition, even if it's unintended, is something that I think the search committees are thinking about. With people that are too close to the previous research.
Yeah, it's kind of a red flag for me in the application. If it reads like the advisor's research plan, then, sort of can raise concerns about, are they going to be able to adapt to new opportunities in the future?
Just to follow up on Vin's comments right there a little bit, if your proposals are very close to either of your advisors, if you ever send it to them to read, right, they might also write this in your letter about, a lack of either maybe where they could talk about creativity and say how your proposals are high risk, high reward, or things like this. You could have the opposite too, where your advisor suggests that they're disappointed that your proposals maybe are similar to things that could be done in their lab and or are things being done in their lab. So there's sort of I guess, an area where you don't really want to step too close, because even though it's a comfort zone idea and you feel like you could hit the ground running with it, you might be in direct competition like Steven suggested, but it may also hurt your application. And just for anybody wondering, we actually have seen letters that do that, so I'm kind of speaking experientially in that perspective.
If you're the only person in a subfield in a department, if they're hiring in a junior person as the only person in the subfield, then that's not always a great situation. I mean, it's a lot of these things are very situational dependent. It matters what the people in the department are like and how flexibly minded they are in assessing things, how willing they are to get external advice. When the physics department wanted to bring in a new subfield that wasn't represented, we would go out and get advice from sort of trusted third parties, and then be willing to listen to it. And because otherwise, as you say, if you don't feel even if it's not that you don't value an unfamiliar subfield, you may not feel like you're qualified to fully assess it. And then that can affect the confidence level of a committee making a decision. So that I would, if you were applying to a place that was interested in someone in your field and they were hiring and they didn't have it at all, and they were hiring at a junior level, and you got to the interview stage, I wouldn't hesitate to apply, first of all. If you got to the interview stage, I would ask them sort of, how do you see this field evolving at, your university in the future? And, how will you be guiding the strategic development of the, how will it fit into the strategic development of the department? You can sort of ask questions that way, and then try to feel out, how you think they're handling it. Because that can be an issue.
Yeah, concerning getting tenure and in that regard, I think you have to remember why you wanted the job in the first place, and don't worry about getting tenure. Try to do great science, be a great mentor and faculty member, and the business part of it will take care of itself. You finally get a shot to go to the big leagues and do your thing, and it's exciting, and it's a lot of fun, and it's scary, but in a good way. And but yeah, it's a great thing.
I don't remember. I mean, I remember I actually got, so Bell Labs was a classic place for condensed matter physics for many years. But when I was in searching, they were, the monopoly, AT&T monopoly was gone, and it wasn't clear what was happening with Bell Labs, but it was kind of falling apart. I actually got an offer there as a member of technical staff, which is, they don't have any assistant professor line. It's sort of just their category. And then I got an offer from Penn State, and I turned down Bell Labs. I distinctly remember turning down Bell Labs, but I can't remember how I felt at the moment. Like the call came from Penn State. Actually, that's funny. For some reason I don't even remember that. I'll probably pop into my head tonight as I'm falling asleep, and I'll remember.
I guess I can jump in. It was a strange day because my advisor had just pulled me into his office and said, Beth, you had all these interviews, but we haven't heard anything yet. And I would be supportive if you wanted to consider contacting Penn State, contacting the other programs, and just, seeing if somebody there, like a Ray Shock or somebody, might be willing to discuss what you could do to improve your application. And you could stick around another year, make those changes, maybe dissect what searches. Was it organic that you got the most interest, or was it a broad search, or was it polymer? And after we had this discussion, I ended up walking over to our glove box and starting to set up some reactions. And then my phone rang, and it was actually Tom. And I didn't really know the number, but I noticed it was a Pennsylvania number. So, one hand in the glove box, the other hand on the iPhone, answered it, and kind of felt my face hit the glove box because I was a little bit shocked, because we just had effectively a conversation saying, like, you could stay here another year, we'll figure it out. And then here's the first offer I got from Penn State. So it was kind of cool and exciting. And I think I don't know, I think the chemistry worked, but I recall probably putting everything down, just relaxing for an hour, and then going back to the glove box to finish things up. So
that's funny. Yeah, I think with me, so I always thought I was going to get a phone call. But instead it was like if I remember, it was like a 6:15 a.m. email, and I happened to have just like gotten up like a little bit before that. So I got this, and I you're reading it, and you're like, this can't possibly, it can't actually be what I'm reading, right? And then I then immediately, kind of internally was, super excited and happy, and it was, this kind of moment of, this full circle kind of moment of all this work and, effort and nervousness and over preparing in some cases, right? That all kind of came onto one moment. And then of course, immediately I realized there is no one I can call right now to tell this, because it is 6:15 in the morning and no one cares enough as much as I do about this. So, it was a very long, a couple, like 2 hours, I guess, before I could finally call somebody and tell them. But it was just, yeah, exciting, and then just kind of started this journey. So, so I like to, participate on this kind of panel and things like that, just to give all of you kind of an idea of what it's like to, go through it, and then, and then beyond. Yeah.
This video was produced by the Center for Nanothread Chemistry. In an effort to promote an inclusive and equitable research environment, postdocs and graduate students received the opportunity to interview a senior scientist in the center to nurture new professional relationships during an informal chat with guided discussion questions during video production. Their discussion was recorded, edited, and posted to share their advice, experience in science, scientific challenges, and more.